Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Imani Rupert-Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for Affinity Community Services. Affinity is a social justice organization. We serve the entire LGBTQ+ community with an emphasis on serving Black LGBTQ+ women. It's our thought that if we serve some of the most underrepresented communities within an already underrepresented community, that everyone stands to benefit from that. So happy to be here with you today.
So happy to be here.
Yes. So I know that you all probably recognize Aisha Davis, who holds the record for having been interviewed the most time at Affinity for CAN TV. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's always a pleasure. So I want to jump right in, and Aisha, I know that you've introduced yourself a zillion times to this community, but please, if you could, introduce yourself again. Talk about your affiliation to Affinity and why you think it's important that we talk about popular culture and the role it plays on larger conversations, especially around people with multiple marginalized identities, because that's a lot of what you and I talk about on
Absolutely.
this show.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe you could share some of that with us.
Sure. Aisha Davis. I am the Vice President of the Board of Directors of Affinity Community Services. Prior to being on the board, I definitely participated in a lot of events with Affinity. I love to come out because it's a space where you feel like you're welcome and can really step in as your full self. So like you said, having these multiple intersecting marginalized identities often means that we're trying to find space where we can just be without having to downplay something or be nuanced about it. It's a freeing experience. So I love Affinity. It's been such a great space for me. I think it's important to talk about these pop culture issues because this is something that we do talk about a lot, right? Like when we are having events where you have space and time to just talk about things and check in with each other, we do bring up pop culture events because it's there. It's the information that we're getting. It's the things that we know about and things that we can relate to. And I think that relatability makes it an important part of conversations because we have nuanced conversations. So we have an understanding about very high-level theoretical topics. Right. But if we're trying to educate folks or trying to get folks to kind of see our side of things or relate to us, citing a pop culture thing is an easier way to do it than to try to have someone deep dive into like master's level theories and read a dissertation, right? So yeah, I think that it is a necessary part of the work that we do to be able to have that relatability and connect with folks in a way that doesn't feel as academic or isolating.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So today we are going to talk about two things that came up in pop culture this week, which is really exciting. And these have to do with people that identify as part of the LGBTQ community. And though some folks are not thrilled with them for some different reasons, this conversation is really about our identities and how we're able to use those identities, how we're able to talk about those identities. And I'm talking, of course, about Frank Ocean and Miley Cyrus.
Yes. Yes.
So just to do a quick recap, Frank Ocean is a pop R&B star. He had that debut album, Thinking About You.
Yes.
And the song afterwards. It
still slaps to this day.
It's a good one. I learned how to play it on the ukulele. It's really, really pretty. Really, really pretty. But really popular. I guess that was nominated for 6 Grammys. Like very, very popular. And people have been looking to him to make new music. And folks have always been following him. And he's never made a public statement about his sexual orientation. But he has written in his songs about having relationships with both men and women. And he also has a very popular Tumblr post where he talks about having relationships with men and women. Many people talk about that Tumblr post as his coming out. And we also know that he's gotten into some public fights, and when he has that, folks have used, I'm thinking Chris Brown in particular. Chris Brown always finds the worst things to do. Yeah. That people have called him things based on his perceived sexual orientation. so he experiences discrimination or hate crimes or something. So he's part of this community, and people see him as part of this community. And this week we heard about a party that Frank Ocean hosted, and the theme of the party was basically, what if PrEP were available in the 1980s, I think 1985. And for those that don't know, PrEP is a drug regimen that someone who's not HIV positive can start, and it will keep them from becoming HIV positive, even if they come in contact with the virus. And so there's this idea, what would things look like in the 1980s if that was something that was available? And that's what he was talking about. And folks haven't really been into that. He's been criticized quite a bit about that. And Aisha, I wanted to ask you, why do you think people reacted so strongly to that?
Yeah, I think that there are a few different reasons why folks might have had some issue with this party, or the idea behind the party. One is that there is an association between PrEP and very large pharmaceutical companies that don't really have a great track record of being accessible, affordable, or focusing on the folks who are oftentimes most marginalized and therefore have very, very much less access to healthcare, right? So having that name and having it be so strongly associated with the event might have ruffled a few people's feathers, because they don't really know why he would pull in these very strong corporate, titles or words. There's another reason why people might be a little bit weary of it, because there is this conversation about reimagining history, or thinking about how things could have been. On my side of things, I'm like, oh, this seems interesting. It's like the flip of Afrofuturism, because you're thinking about the past, like trying to center this identity that is not often centered when we're talking about the telling of history. So we're talking about people living with HIV, right? And if PrEP existed, what could that have done in the process of folks really trying to party or interact with folks, or what it would look like if that difference was there. How much more joy there could have been. How much more love there could have been. How many more people would still be around if that was the case, if PrEP existed in the 80s. But then also to kind of boil down this very difficult conversation, very complicated conversation around HIV, around this epidemic, to a party scene. People might feel a little iffy about that too, because a lot of the really negative stereotypes about LGBTQ folks, especially about queer men, is that they're just there to party and hook up, and that's it. And people, I think, struggle with trying to be supportive and sex positive and open to having conversations, and combating these really hard, really difficult stereotypes that are still so pervasive in a lot of ways. So I can see why a few people were having complex feelings about this. But honestly, I think that it's a very interesting thought project to have, to just reimagine what things could have been if we had these scientific advances, if we had access to care, if we, were able to just kind of be our full selves and joyful in these spaces back then.
Right. I think that's such a great perspective to have, and he sort of publicly said that as an artist, I have to be able to reimagine things. I have to be able to imagine realities that aren't in existence. That's part of the way that I'm able to do my art. And we also know that this isn't that far off. We know that that there were so many books and articles and writings at the time that there was this pill that people could take, that somehow it would make this go away or mitigate or something that was killing off a generation of our folks, And so this reimagining isn't even something that wasn't imagined at the time, So there's that. But the other part, and that's the part where I think the kind of messiness comes in, is that there's a reason that PrEP or PrEP didn't exist during that time, and it was because there was no research out there. It's not like Ronald Reagan was even saying the word HIV. Right. And so this sort of reimagining, I think it's really nice for folks that are living now that can look back at this time and think about the advances, because they didn't go through them in the same way. But if Ronald Reagan or the president, if folks in positions of power were willing to talk about this, then resources were allocated so that folks could do research to create something like PrEP, then we would still have some people here. Because some people just had to, if they could just live long enough for better medications to come out, that would be. And so I think that has been something that's that's difficult, you know?
Yeah, because then you wouldn't have to imagine it, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have to be pretend or like this thought project. It could have been reality if there were this access. And I know that there are a lot of folks who are fearful about that right now, because if we are reimagining history, are we not educating folks about what happened, and therefore are we setting ourselves up to repeat the past, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a friendly administration to a lot of the issues that we're talking about, and that are being brought up when we're talking about these kinds of conversations around PrEP or PEP. So we're living in a time right now where we have an administration that doesn't want to fund these things, where we might be seeing some decisions from the highest court in the land that are denying people's identities, or denying their rights. And so trying to imagine something in the past where we would have had more access or more research available or more scientific advances, while still combating a lot of concerns and questions around resources and research, could feel like folks aren't really grasping the gravity of what the history meant, and are therefore less prepared to combat things that are happening right now. So I think that the difficult thing is that we don't want to necessarily shut down the joy that comes from this reimagining, right? Mm-hmm. This is a party where, I mean, honestly, it sounds like a themed party. It's an 80s party. You could dress how you want, like inspired by the 80s. And
you love a theme.
I love a theme. And you get to pretend that you lived in a more accepting and open and loving world. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's always benefit to joy, right? There's always, especially for marginalized communities. But I also think that there's benefit to education and information. And so while we're also while we're reimagining what could have been, I think we should also remember what did happen, so that we don't fall into those similar traps.
I concur. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I want to move on. We only have a little bit of time. Miley's story is a bit different.
Quite a bit, yeah.
You know? But, you know, staying with this theme, too, about owning your parts of your identity and how you can sort of utilize it, especially, like, in terms of how pop culture works and how people are looking at you. But just a little background on Miley. Miley Cyrus came out as pansexual, and then someone that's pansexual is romantically or sexually or attracted to someone regardless of gender or sex assigned at birth, and also, you know, regardless of their gender or sex or assigned at birth. And so Miley came out as pansexual, and then also came out as gender fluid.
Yes.
Miley also started the Happy Hippie Foundation, which specifically looks to provide resources for LGBTQ youth. So very much open and out in the community. She's dated, very publicly dated both men and women, very, very publicly. And then she married her sort of longtime on and off boyfriend, Liam Hemsworth.
Right.
They recently called their marriage quits, and then she started dating a woman, Caitlyn Carter, and then after they broke up, she started dating a man, Cody Simpson, and you know, all's good. We were loving all this,
love who you love, date who you want.
Exactly.
There you go.
Except recently, she in an Instagram post where all the brilliance comes out, she said, "There are good men out there, guys. You don't have to be gay." And people didn't love that.
Yeah, no.
We're going to talk about that. So she later clarified the statement, saying that she's happy to be part of the LGBTQ community, that she continues to be part of the LGBTQ community, and acknowledging that you don't choose your sexual orientation.
Right.
But it did come out of her mouth. And
it did.
For someone that does this work, I think people are questioning what that meant.
They
and
are.
So,
Yes.
they're still not here for it.
They're not.
What do you think?
You know, I think that it's a interesting conversation, and also reminds me of one of my favorite phrases, which is "words mean things." So I think that if it was not Miley Cyrus who said this, if it wasn't someone with a huge platform who had been so vocal about their sexual orientation and their support of, or sexual orientation and gender identity, right, for her, and had been so vocal about being supportive and understanding and really elevating this conversation, it might not have been as big of an issue. But once she kind of stepped into the role of a champion for a community or someone who wanted to be a really strong supporter of community, it meant that when she talks about it, people listen closer than they would to someone else. And especially when we're talking about any identity that is not monosexual. So meaning you're attracted to more than one gender or sex or gender presentation. Outside of monosexual orientations, people face a lot of stigma and a lot of stereotypes that they are confused or they're unfaithful or they just want to be greedy. Like all of these things keep coming up. And for her to say something like, oh, you can find a man, you don't have to be gay. It's her way of being cute and funny, but it's also kind of flippant and leads people right back to those stereotypes.
Right.
And no one on the opposite side of our movements loves anything more than when someone that we see as a champion says something like this, because then they can point to it and be like, even your own people are saying these things.
Right.
So it's a frustrating thing. It's frustrating that this happened. I understand and appreciate that she came out and clarified it. But when you have such a large platform, when you have been this voice, you have to be more careful and be a little bit more aware of the way that your words will be interpreted and spread.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I feel like if I was a celebrity, I couldn't possibly manage my social media.
I would go the Beyonce route.
I mean,
you know?
What is the Beyonce
The
route?
Beyonce route is you take pictures, or you have someone take pictures of you professionally.
There we go.
Have them post it to your Instagram, and maybe once every 3 months you have a caption. And the caption is always very like when she announced her pregnancy, I'm pregnant, thank you for the love and support, we're so excited. Like when she was talking about the Beachella thing, she's like, this was such an amazing event, thank you for the love and support.
I love it.
Like, that is what Beyonce does, and honestly, she should teach a masterclass on it, because a lot of people could benefit from to post the beautiful picture and go.
Yeah, and thank you for your love and support.
Thank you for your love and support, that's it. Yeah.
That's, you can just get into so much trouble. But yes, to your point, I think because I think what she was trying to do is say something nice about
her new boyfriend.
Her new boo.
Yeah.
Exactly. And she just wanted to say that he's great. And I think that when we are, especially in the beginning of relationships, we want to say, like, you are perfect. And the reason that none of my other relationships worked is because you have this special thing. Yeah. You're what perfect is, you know? And but it was really painful for folks because she has been, we've been on this show even talking about how hard it is sometimes for people to come out, that we are hearing that people might come out, or what this. And she came out. She came out, and we saw her in relationships with people. We saw her with different folks, and she also did some pretty cool things too. Like when she got married, she said, and people said, "Oh, well, you're not part of the LGBTQ community." She was very clear. She's like, just because I'm married to this man does not take away my own sexual orientation. I'm still very much a part of this community.
Right.
And I thought that was really amazing, because we know that bi erasure happens because people think that that's what happens.
Exactly.
That pansexual people aren't always part of the LGBTQ discussion because of what a particular relationship looks like in that moment, and which is really detrimental to our movement. And so she's done so much good there, and I think that was really painful for folks. But also, it's bringing up something familiar, and I wanted to ask you about this in particular. So, it's no secret that Miley Cyrus has been widely criticized for appropriating Black culture. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that discrimination based on sexual orientation and discrimination based on race are the same things. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying, though, that the sentiment to discriminate on someone based on their identity, that is the same. That sentiment is the same. And so if she has this track record of appropriating an identity or talking about or claiming an identity when it seems to benefit her, and then dropping it or abandoning it just as easily as she got it when she has something else to say, and using this platform and doing this on this large stage, that's uncomfortable for people, but really unfair for folks that are holding these identities that can't just drop them.
Exactly.
And so I was wondering, do you think that there's any merit to that argument?
I think that there's definitely merit to the critique of what she's doing, because she does have this track record where she started out very bubblegum, Hannah Montana, and then flipped that entire identity and started to really align herself with rap culture, black culture, was out here twerking on Robin Thicke at the MTV VMAs, doing all these things. And then once that did not seem to serve her as much, she went back to a more country, quote-unquote cleaner pop visual, right, and embrace that again. So I can understand why folks would be like, oh, these are parallel situations, right? These are similar things, and we know what she did then, so we know what she's going to do now, right? That's how people are feeling, and I understand that, right? I remember seeing her go from Hannah Montana, putting on this kind of different idea of what she thought it might have meant to embrace black culture, and then going away from that. A lot of pop artists do that. It's kind of their way to distance themselves from a very squeaky clean image, and then kind of dropping it. And so when you have something that you have been loud about, that you've celebrated, that you've held up, that you've associated with yourself, and then have shown in the past that you can kind of tuck it away, right? You've been polishing this trophy, and then you just kind of put it in the closet, and you don't worry about it anymore. People are really concerned, and I'm sure that they're, especially for LGBTQ young people who are being served by the foundation that she created, there's this fear of, is she going to leave us behind? Is she stepping away from us now? What does this mean? If this relationship with this new boyfriend lasts forever, will she say more things like this? So there's I understand why this critique is happening, and it is, I think, a way for people to brace themselves for what's to come and be prepared for whatever outcome it is. I know she came on and clarified her statements. However, there's no way to know exactly what she will do in the future. So I'm sure that there are a lot of young people who are looking to her, especially because she has such a large platform. She is such a vocal supporter of community and someone who identifies strongly with community. So there's a reason why people are worried, and I can understand that,
I think you bring up an excellent point. I hadn't thought about how that affects her foundation and the young folks that are served. I think that's an excellent point. I think that would be really, really painful. It's so hard. We talk about pop culture so much because it's important to have representation like this, and we put a lot of pressure on folks, they are, they're pop stars. They're not, queer scholars,
Right.
And we do put a great deal of pressure on them. But it's also, but they have a platform too, and we don't always get to choose when we're role models. We don't always get to choose those things. And I think we'd like to think that we do, but we don't,
Right.
And so hopefully hopefully this discussion is part of making Miley Cyrus better too,
Yes, exactly.
Because if you say that you belong part of the community, like we want you, you belong part of the community, let's just be as careful as we can to help support folks.
Exactly.
Yeah. We are out of time. Aisha, it is always such a pleasure.
Always fun to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, see you probably in a month and a half, 2 months.
There we go.
Yeah, right.
I'll be here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for hearing about us. We come on the fourth Friday of the month, and we'd like to talk about intersectional identities with regards to sexual orientation, race, gender, and a variety of intersectional things. If you ever have any ideas for things you think we should talk about, or if you want to come on and be part of the show, we would love to have you. You can email me. I'm Imani Rupert Gordon. I'm at imani@affinity95.org. You can call and give us any feedback, or let us know that you'd like to be part. Y'all, it's Friday night. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful evening, that you have a lot of fun tonight. You're going to go out, have fun, be safe. And thanks so much for tuning in again. We appreciate it.
Bye, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.